thank you for coming here today. I heard that you have another episode to talk about, and what I've heard it's about cram schools in Japan, or as we famously know them as Juku.
That's correct, and it's something that's close to heart for me because I worked for 3 years in the Japanese school system as an English assistant teacher, and as you well know, we have paid many cram schools to get both of you through university.
Right.
So we're pretty familiar with the industry. And as an investor, I've invested quite often in areas of education between 1995 and also quite recently. Actually, you know, I'm not a big movie fan, but 3 of my favorite movies relate to social issues. One is about Alzheimer's, and 2 of them are about education. The one about Alzheimer's is called Hanichi Monmei, which is a fascinating movie about an archaeologist who has Alzheimer's and then rediscovers his love for archaeology, even though he's gone in terms of his mental capacity. And the 2 other movies are, again, I came to Japan in '87, and in '83, there was a famous movie called Kazoku Game. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Okay, so you know it. It's Matsuri Yusaku. If you've heard of it, then you know it's basically about what?
About Juken, right?
It's about the trials of in Japan we say Juken Senso.
Right, right.
Literally the cram school wars. And it shows somebody who's struggling to get into their preferred university, and they have a private tutor that comes and teaches them, and it's a really good movie. It's what's the guy, Morita Yoichiro? Morita was a director. Right. The other movie, which also hits close to home, is a movie called Gakko, literally school. And it's about Yakkan Gakko, or night school. And that's also close to home because I actually worked in a night school in Japan, in Tokyo, Kudan Koko, at Kudanshita High School. And so it was a lesson on Japanese society. Because, you know, when you see people going to school during the day, you have one impression of the Japanese school students. But there's a lot of students that, you know, we have the obligatory school and education in Japan is till at age 16, so till junior high.
Right.
But there's a lot of people, for whatever reason, whether it be for economic reasons, maybe it might be bullying, it might be they just weren't able to get into the studying mood. I think most of it's usually economic reasons. For some reason, they had to drop out of school. Some of them are like chimpira, kind of a bit like furio. They're kind of like kids that you might see on the street in Kabukicho or something like that. That somehow they got on the wrong path. And then a year or 2 later, they're coming back and trying to finish their high school at night. But anyways, this was a good education about you know, the different paradigms that go on within high school. And the reason I wanted to talk to you today about Juku is because I read a very interesting article last week in the Nikkei, economic newspaper, and it was about a company called Hewlett. Have you ever heard of Hewlett?
Yeah, they're in real estate, right?
That's right. They're a real estate developer and property management company. And it turns out that they had bought a Juku, a cram school called Tetsurokukai. Have you heard of Tetsurokukai?
Yeah, apparently they specialize in sending students to University of Tokyo.
Exactly. That's their calling. Anybody who wants to go to University of Tokyo, I think basically I don't know what it was, if it's 25 or 35%. They have a very, very high success rate in getting students there. And so I was surprised when I read this article, because I was thinking, well, you know, my image of the Japanese demographics, remember in 1995, the high school age children, so from grade 9, 10, 11, or 10, 11, 12, should I say, was basically about 5 million people. And now it's about 3 million people. And in 2050, it'll be about 2.2 million people. So it's not exactly what you call a growth industry.
No.
So that's that. When I saw the article, it made me surprised. Like, why are they investing in this kind of business? And I invested in the business in the early 2000s because we had certain dynamics going on that were very favorable to the cram school industry. Have you ever heard of the Kawasaki steel bat incident?
There's so many of those incidents. It must be one of them.
Okay,
unfortunately.
Japan in its prime, when it had its high period of growth, there was a lot of pressure on students to study.
Right.
And so they were going to these cram schools, and unfortunately, this is kind of like a watershed event. It's very sad. In Osaka, there was a person who was doing his second year of going to cram school, trying to get into high school, trying to get into university. And he killed his parents, one of his parents, I think, because he was being pressured and he felt like, I can't take this pressure anymore. And so throughout the 80s, we had a kind of revisionism about, whether this cram school society is good for Japan. And between 84 and 87, Prime Minister Nakasone, which you might remember him for. Do you remember him?
I just remember that he was best buddies with Reagan.
That's exactly. Yeah, he was always my buddy Ronnie.
Yep.
And he was also a good swimmer. Every time you saw him, even into his 90s, I think you saw him swimming. But
I didn't see that.
You didn't see that, okay. But that's why he lived so long, I think. But he had this education reform committee that he had for 3 years, and in 87, they came away with some recommendations. And their primary recommendation was for what they call yutori kyoiku. Have you heard of yutori kyoiku?
That is a very big keyword in education.
It's a keyword. I don't know how you'd literally translate it. You'd get like freedom of movement or freedom of expression, or just a bit of freedom in the way.
That's what yutori means, right?
Yeah. And in the context of education, it meant that the Japanese curricula was much too intense, much too in-depth, and the actual school hours required were too long. And so it basically set out to reduce the number, the actual amount of curriculum by about 20 to 30%. They started to implement that in 92, and gradually through the 90s, it continued till 2002, where in the final stage, people no longer went to school on Saturday.
Oh, wow.
Which was quite revolutionary.
Yeah.
When I came to Japan, I was shocked when I saw all the kids going to school on Saturday. And so the reason I mention this to you is because it's with this in mind that the Juku or cram school system in Japan grew through the 80s and 90s, because most parents started to worry about their kids. Are they getting enough education at their normal school? So they had the yutori kyoiku, the freedom of education, and they, as a result of that, the parents started to invest more and more in their children's cram schools. And there was one study that I think between 1999 and 2004, spending per parent above the median income. So median income now is about 4.2 million yen, and the average is about 5.7. That the spending was up 97%. So I don't know what that compares to, but currently, if you're in elementary school, a typical elementary school could be spending between 200,000 and 300,000 yen a year, and that's on average. So you have to remember that most people in first, second, and third grade, they won't be spending much on their cram school unless they're going to Kumon or something basic.
Right.
And in high school, it can easily get up to over 1 million yen a year. So as a result of this yutori kyoiku, we saw that Japanese were being pushed into relying more and more on the cram schools. And we saw this continue until 2000 and basically from 2002 to 2011, where there was a backlash. And do you know what that was for?
I'm not sure.
Well, when you think of Japan, you always think of Japan as having one of the highest academic standards in the world. And in 2000, there's a score called the PISA score. PISA score is an educational study ability score run by OECD. And in around 2000, I think the mathematics were either first or second. And in 2003, after just 1 or 2 years of this yutori kyoiku, they had fallen to sixth. And in reading, they fell from, I think, 8th to 12th or something. And in the next, every 3 years, the next one in 2006, they did it again, and they had fallen further. So there was the whole Ministry of Education were panicked. They say we have to revise the system, and they ended up by 2011 almost going back to what they had previously because they thought it wasn't successful. But so I kept thinking, it's ironic that the effort to push this Yutori Kyoiku basically pushed your average Japanese into relying more and more on the cram schools. And I don't know the exact numbers, but I think it's almost like half of Japanese go to some kind of cram schools.
Oh, wow.
And it's very hard to get into certain universities if you don't.
Right.
I know the rare case of somebody who didn't study at all and got into Tokyo University.
Oh, that's incredible.
That's incredible. It really is incredible. And so that is one trend that we've seen in education, and that's why this story that we saw on the weekend with the Hewlett buying Tetsuroku Kai was quite surprising. And it caused me to look back over this sector, this education sector, and see if my preconceptions have changed much, because again, I used to invest a lot in them in the early 2000s because that's when we had very strong growth. And then I went back and I checked some of the companies, and many of the listed companies, of course more than half of them are not listed, saw over the last 3 years about 20% top line growth. And I looked into that, and I saw that that was a result of a movement that we've seen in Japan for the last, I guess, 15, 16 years, calling for free tuition for high schoolers. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I think it was started with by the Minshito.
It was started by Minshito. What's his name again? I forget his name. The Prime Minister in 2010.
Hatoyama, right?
Hatoyama, that's right, good memory. And it was also started in Osaka Prefecture in 2010 by Hashimoto, the governor. And at first, it basically made, I didn't think that high schools, public high schools were, I thought they were free, but with all costs considered, it's probably about 130,000 a year. And so that was made free. And then in gradual steps, there were complaints. They say, well, if the high schools are free, you should make them private schools free. So they had a band in 2014, I think, where it was 5.9 million yen. So if you earned less than that, you could get about a 400,000 yen subsidy for the private schools. And then they raised it to 9.1 million yen shortly thereafter. And the Ishin no Kai, which was part of the coalition government in the Diet, last year or 2 years ago, they pushed the Komeito and the Jiu Minshito, the LDP, to as a part of their program to include free high school education countrywide. And so starting this year, and it was gradually implemented, but as of this year, all high school students have free education for even private schools.
Wow.
And I think that affected like, I don't remember, it was almost like 800,000 or 750,000 kids. And the whole budget for that is about 600 billion yen. So we've had two huge factors in changes in the Japanese education system in the last 20, 30, 40 years. The first one is the Juku or Cram school phenomenon, and the second is the movement to make high schools free, even if they're private. But remember, even though they're giving them how should I say, a stipend or some kind of subsidy, I think in Osaka it's about 500,000 a year. In Tokyo it's about 600,000 a year. Doesn't mean it's free, because they're probably the fees are probably about double that, so it just means they got a 50% subsidy for the private schools. But we have to think about, whether we're really getting our desired effects from what we're doing, or whether we're not realizing the undesired effect from the policy that we're undertaking. And in the first case, in the case of Yutori Kyoiku, you have to remember that the whole idea was to free up students so that they would have more time, so that they wouldn't be so focused on their studies, studies to get into junior high school, studies to get into high school, studies to get into university. And the irony is that when they gave them extra time, they didn't have to go to school on Saturdays, they had 10 or 20% less of curricula, then they actually pushed them more into going into the cram schools because parents were afraid that they weren't getting taught enough.
That's ironic.
Isn't it ironic?
Yeah.
So there was a number of undesired effects. The symbolic of that, I think, is the fact that in Tokyo, the number of students that went to private high schools in 1980 was about 40%. And last year, I think, was 58%.
Oh, wow.
58%. And Osaka is slightly less, it's about 45%. But on a countrywide basis, it's only 25%. So in a way, you could say it's basically something to favor Tokyo. The other undesired effect is that it basically told students that, well, we're not getting a proper academic teaching at the public schools, we better go to the private schools. And to get into the private schools means that we have to study more. So normally, again, you would study just before in grade 4, 5, and 6 to get into junior high, and then and 7, 8, 9, 7, 8 to get into high school. But now you have to study earlier because most of the Japanese schools are not just junior high, high school, they're combined.
Right.
So it basically pushed the Japanese into going more into the cram schools to get into the schools they wanted, and to doing it at an earlier age.
Oh, wow.
So we had that, and we also had, again, the free tuition meant that people who were normally spending $1 million, $1.2 million for their high school education had basically a 500,000 yen or 450,000 yen subsidy. And again, you have to look at the dichotomy between the median income and the lower income. And the policy was basically designed to help overall education. It was basically designed to, kind of like a Friedman style economics, where you say, well, if you make them both free, or you promote competition between private and public schools, you'll get better schools overall. But it also basically meant that people that were above the median income basically took the majority of that savings, or have been taking it, and put it in their cram school spending. Whereas the people that were below the median didn't have that extra economic leeway to start with. And so whereas the private schools might spend another 100,000, 200,000 or more because of the subsidy, the people in the public schools maybe spend 50,000 or less. And the reality is that in Japan, in the elementary schools, the average, this is average, remember, grade 1 to 6, you're going to be studying 4, 5, and 6 to get into junior high.
Right.
But on average for the 6 years, the private schools or the public schools are spending about 80,000 yen per year per student. And in the private schools, it's about 260,000 yen. So in that way, people will say, well, it's not really fair because you were basically giving the people who already have money more money, and they're going to spend that money in using the cram schools, and we're going to see a greater gap between the low income and the higher income people. So I think we're seeing a lot of undesired effects in that regard.
They didn't anticipate this?
I don't know. I would assume they had anticipated, but they're basically pushing students to study harder, depending more on the cram schools, and to start studying lower, at a lower age. And there's another undesired effect, and this is what really concerns me, is because, coming from the West, coming from Canada or the US, we don't really think about private and public schools, or we don't think about having to depend on cram schools that much.
Right.
Because I don't think there are many cram schools in Canada or the US, but in Japan, people are so dependent on that to get into their favorite university, and they say, well, first of all, I have to get into a good private school, and to get into a good private school, I need cram school. So what that has as an undesired effect is that whereas in 2010 there were about 140 public high schools in Osaka Prefecture, 10 years later there was about 131. And now I think in Osaka they have a rule basically where you have a fixed limit for students, where you ask students to apply, and if you do not achieve that fixed minimum limit for 3 years in a row, you basically say the school is likely a candidate to be closed. And currently I think there's 9 more schools that are on that list, so that means we could go from 140 to 131 to 122 in the next few years. So far from helping the school system, it's kind of hollowing out the school system and forcing more and more students into private schools. And there was one study that said, I think 25% of people who had intended to go to public schools with these subsidies said they were now going to try to go to private schools. So we can just see this trend continuing. And it's fine for people in Tokyo, where you have such a great selection of private and public schools.
Right.
But if you live in the regions, if you live in some parts of Kyushu or Shikoku or what have you, you might not have a private school to go to. And on a countrywide basis, only about 25% of people go to private schools.
Right.
So that's having a tremendous undesired effect in kind of hollowing out the public school system. And again, coming from I went to a private school actually, but in terms of public schools, you think, they have the enriched stream for the very smart kids, they have the normal stream for the average kids, and they have the assisted learning stream or what have you for the kids that need a bit of help. But I don't really think they have that principle in Japan. Japan tries to promote equality, so the public school system is not necessarily going to give those enriched programs that a Western school might offer.
I see.
So that's one problem. The other problem is the idea of public versus private schools. In Japan, about 25% of the kids go to private schools, high schools. And in the US and Canada, it's about 10%, I think. Of course, private schools in Japan are not expensive. They're about, like I said, they were about $1 million, $1.2 million, and now you get almost 500,000–600,000 yen subsidy. Why do people go to private schools?
They want better education, I guess.
Better education, and they want to be able to go to the university of their choice.
Right.
The private schools in Japan obviously are very good, and the private schools in the U.S. are obviously very good. And if you want to go to an Ivy League school in the U.S., I think 50% or more of their students, even higher, I think, actually go to private schools. But there are a ranking of the top schools in Japan. And of the top 15 schools in Japan, how many do you think are public?
Oh, I'm not sure. I mean, I get the impression that there's a lot of great private schools, but not the public ones.
Well, I find it hard to remember some of the public schools because they don't get the notoriety like that a Nada school or La Salle would in Japan. But when I checked the data, there was only 3, and basically 2 are from the same school, Tsukuba.
Oh.
And the other one is Hibiya, which is close to us. So you have only 3 of the top 15 schools are public. So basically that's saying if you want to get into a top university, especially in math or science or law or medicine, you probably need to go to a private school. Now, in the case of the U.S., how many of the top schools do you think are public, of top 15?
Oh, I don't know. I guess very little as well.
10.
10.
So 10 of the top 15 in the U.S. are public. 3 of the top 15 in Japan are public.
Wow, that's a lot of good public schools in the U.S.
The public schools in the U.S. they seem to be doing their job. And of course, it means a lot more in the U.S. because you're basically going to spend what you spend for university to go to a good private school because they're easily $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year.
Right.
So that, I think, is another issue that Japan has to deal with. And the reason I mentioned that, the unfairness about that, is because if you look at the Japanese universities, you say, well, okay, so where do, like, again, where, if I wanted to go to a Waseda or Keio or one of the better private universities, what's my chance of getting in from a public or private school? It's not that high. I mean, relative, proportionally. I think that almost 70% or more than 70% of students to these schools have gone to private schools. Ironically, even if you wanted to get into Tokyo University, over 50% of their students go to private schools. So it means you have to be very smart going to a public school to get into these schools, which I don't think is fair. The other issue, which I find, quite ironic, is that when I came to Japan in '87, we had a new law that had been just enacted in '85, and I don't know exactly how I would translate it. Danjo Byodo Ho, Danjo Byodo Ho, Koyo Kinto Ho.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
So which means equal employment opportunity for men and women. And that basically said we want you to discourage you from discriminating against men and women in employment. And it really had no teeth. It was just kind of like a pushing them with the moral pressure, what have you. And that was strengthened in '99, where it actually made it illegal to say that this job is only for a woman or only for a man. And it was further strengthened to say that you can't fire a woman just because she's pregnant or something like that. But the whole idea was to promote equality.
Right.
But the reason I find it ironic is because you have for general society, you have this law that's promoting equality. But before you get to that level, you have to think about whether you're promoting equality within your school system.
They weren't promoting equality in the school system?
Well, the reason I say that I don't think they're promoting equality in the school system is basically because if you look at the top 15 schools, how many of them in Japan do you think were co-ed?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I would have thought that they were all co-ed.
Only one.
Only one?
Only one. And in the U.S.?
I guess a lot of them are co-ed?
All of them.
All of them.
All of them. And so if we think, okay, we need to go to a private school or we need to go to a top-level public school to get into one of our better universities, then you'd want to have them to have the opportunity, equal opportunity to go to a very good private school. But that opportunity, I think, is limited. And I think that's also reflected in the entrance numbers for women and men in the top universities, and especially in the top fields of medicine and engineering and law and what have you. And for example, if you think in the U.S., what do you think the percentage of women in law or medicine is? How much do you think?
50%?
55%.
Okay.
In Japan, it's...
Oh, I don't know. Maybe 20?
I think it's about 20 to, in some cases, I think it's about 30, 37 maybe in some areas, but generally closer to 20%. And for law, it's about 40%.
Okay.
But in engineering, it's like 15%.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of women in engineering.
I don't see a lot of women in engineering either. And if in the U.S. it's still not that much, but it's a little over 30%. So what I'm trying to say is that we've had two laws in the last 30 years. One that's trying to promote equality among social economic classes, and also trying to promote. The one is the tuition subsidy or tuition-free high school, trying to promote economic equality, and the other is trying to give students a bit of leeway to stop having to focus on their studies, and is ironically pushing them more and more into cram schools. And going back to the initial point that I said when I read the newspaper with this Hewlett that was buying Tetsuroku-kai, which is the top-level cram school in Japan, I thought, wow, that's a strange business to be in, because demographically speaking, we've gone from 5 million high schoolers in '95 to 3 million today, and probably about 2.2 million in 2050. So it wouldn't be what you consider to be a growth sector.
Right.
But in fact, the spending on high school, or should I say Juku, has been growing more than almost any other sector. Certainly on a per capita basis, yeah. And of course the reason is that if you get a 450,000 or 500,000 subsidy for high school, if you have better than the median income, you basically take it and pour it into education again. But if you're struggling below the median income and you get that subsidy, very few people are actually being able to take advantage of it.
Why that? Why's that?
Well, because they're basically struggling to pay their basic expenses. So they might say, okay, we'll spend 50,000 more or what have you, but they never really had the option of going to the private school originally, because they were saying, well, it's going to cost me over $1 million just for the entrance, and then it's going to cost me more than $1 million per year. And again, the irony here is that even those people that were aiming for the high school private schools, now, because most of the high schools and junior highs are connected, they have to study younger and younger, from the 3rd or 4th grade in elementary school to get into the junior high school so that they can take the benefit of the high school free tuition.
Wow, that's a long time to study.
It's a long time study, but they say that over 35% of Japanese are already thinking about their high schools and junior high schools from the age of grade 3.
Wow.
So I think there's a number of undesired effects that we're having here that we really have to consider. And the other tragedy or sadness about this is that we're becoming more and more dependent on the cram schools to help the students. We're becoming more and more dependent on the private schools, and we're seeing a hollowing out of the public schools. And those public schools serve a very valuable function where there are those students that are struggling. They have truancy problems. They're not quite as sharp, or they have a certain mental incapabilities that prevent them from succeeding or maintaining the same level as the normal stream. And that's what a lot of these schools are providing. But ironically, the number of schools that have been closed, there's a predominantly higher ratio of those type of students in those schools. So they are suffering, and the very group of people that we might wanted to have helped in the beginning are probably suffering more as a result of that.
I see.
So that's one issue that we have. And the other thing that I noticed when I looked at the article is, again, so if they're investing in these schools, then business must be good. And again, it should be good, but again, the demographics are for a smaller and smaller student population. And so I looked at the numbers and I looked at the companies, and most of those companies, although the industry in Japan is probably about $1.5 trillion in revenue, so less than $10 billion, but and less than half of them are actually listed. But if you look at the listed companies, you'll see there's a trend here for vertical integration. We had the case here of Hewlett here, which I think 2 years ago they bought a company called Risso Kyoiku, which manages Thomas.
Yeah.
Thomas had an accounting scandal in 2014, but they actually have a pretty good program, and I think you probably know it pretty well, don't you?
Because I've been there.
That's right. And so they bought the high-end Tetsurokukai Cram School, and what do you think their strategy probably is?
Riso bought Tetsurokukai?
Hewlett bought Tetsurokukai this year, and 4 years ago, or 2 years ago, they bought 51% of Riso, which owns Thomas, the Cram School, tutoring school.
I guess they're trying to consolidate a lot of cram school businesses.
We're seeing a consolidation. Basically, we're seeing a further vertical integration. On this chart here, you can see that there's many groups that have more than one cram school in their group. Nagase, which I think, Nagase has Toshin, and they have Yotsuya, and Waseda Juku, and Waseda Academy. And we have Zedkai, which also owns Eiko Zemi, and Yoyogi Zemi, which also owns Sapix or Sapix, which is very good and very strong with the elementary and junior high school kids. So what's happening is we're seeing basically these schools, they're saying, okay, well, we get a very strong university cram school that's aimed at students that want to go to university. If they don't succeed in this school, then we can offer them to our feeder schools, either at a lower level or on a tutoring basis. And if we're very lucky, obviously they don't go straight from Kumon, which is like for the grade 1 or grade 2 people, but they try to get them early, get them in their program. The ones that are accelerating, that can reach the higher level cram schools, they push them there. The ones that don't qualify, because you have to qualify to go to cram school, right?
Right.
I think that only 25% or 30% of people that apply to go to Tetsurokukai actually get in. So it's good for it's good for Hewlett to say, well, why don't you try our tutoring system at Thomas and what have you?
I see.
So there's a tremendous vertical integration, and again, if you look at the performance, Waseda Academy has done very well over the last 2 or 3 years, primarily because we're seeing higher spend per capita on the cram schools. You'll see that I think we're going to see further and further concentration, and there's a vertical integration in the cram school system. Which is not to say that I think it's a good idea, because again, I think we're being pushed more and more to depend on them, because the public schools aren't being given the support that they need to help those students to get into their good universities or get into their good high schools or junior high schools.
I see.
So what we've had now is we had a lot of pressure on students, and the pressure resulted in this movement to Yutori Kyoiku in 2002. That was ended in 2011, and the reason it was ended is, do you know why?
I guess it wasn't the students were scoring well in the international education benchmarks.
Exactly, and so the PISA scores were weak, and now we have done the PISA scores now for 4 times because every 3 years. Again, it's the OECD study of academic ability. And Japan, I think in some areas it's come back. I think was it in math or reading? You know, they came back maybe from 15th to 8th, and overall from 8th to like 4th. But it's a bit misleading because the last test was done in 2022 or 2022 or 23. But many countries didn't participate. So China and Vietnam and a number of countries didn't participate. So it's kind of like doing a gymnastic Olympics and not having some of the strong Olympic companies participate in your group. So I looked obviously at the Japanese Juku or Cram school system, but also I've had the opportunity to look as an investor not only in Japan, but in the Chinese school system or Cram school system. And the asymmetric response by the Chinese and Japanese to the same problem is fascinating.
How is it different?
Well, I mean, when you think of Asia, you think of the tiger mother phenomenon,
yeah,
right?
Of course.
And of course, you think of the Japanese schools and the cram schools. They study so hard. You know, they get home, have dinner, and they're going to their cram schools, literally. And I'm sure that by the time you're in grade 4, 5, 6, you're spending a couple hours every night studying for your exams. And by the time you're in grade 6, you're spending 20 hours or more a week studying, right?
Right.
So they had this problem in China, and their response in 2021 was to outlaw all cram schools for children up to grade 9.
Oh no.
Yeah, and so for me as an investor, you know, we have companies like I think New Oriental and TAL, which were the largest players in the space, and those 2 companies alone had a market cap of about 18 trillion yen. So I think over $11 billion. And the government literally overnight said we think it's unfair. And the reason why they banned it is because first of all they said it distorted economic equality, because basically if you had more money you could afford to spend more money on a cram school to go to the right university. And it said it was unduly causing stress on children where every waking moment, whether it would be a weekend or a holiday, they were being forced to go to cram school. And so as a result of that, I think 160 or 180,000 teachers lost their job literally overnight.
Wow.
It was incredible. And I mean, I can't imagine any government doing that and just, you know, causing complete upheaval in the industry.
Especially China, because they're very famous for their very prestigious Kaoshu exam, right? Very competitive.
Wow, I'm surprised you know that. That's true.
It's very famous.
Yeah, it's famous, and you would think, how do you study for it if you don't have a cram school to help you?
Yeah.
So they did that, and you know, I guess the numbers aren't really in yet to see whether that has promoted some equality, and whether, more importantly, in terms of the desired effect, whether it's reduced the stress in the students, and secondly, whether it has meant that the lower economic echelons have an equal opportunity to get into some of the better schools. Ironically, these New Oriental and TAL are like high-tech companies basically, and some of them have gotten into e-commerce, gotten into programs for getting higher qualifications in AI and robotics, and in adult learning.
Oh, so they pivoted to other fields of education.
They pivoted, but it's still, I think, no more than 30% of the scale that they had before. Because before they had, I think, like over, what was it, maybe 20 billion a year in sales or something like that. So they're not quite at that level. And again, the stocks, the market cap was over $110 billion. It's a pivot and it's an experiment, but it's fascinating to see that the different approaches that both the Japanese and the Chinese have taken.
Which one would you say is more successful?
Well, I think for me, if you're going to spend 600 billion yen a year in Japan to subsidize the high school students so that they get a free or near free education, I think you should first of all spend the 600 billion in the public schools so that they don't have the incentive to go to the private schools.
Right.
And the public schools should basically be teaching them so that they don't feel like they're forced to go to the cram schools after school, because they have no social life and no athletic life basically once they hit their last year of high school, last year of elementary school or high school. And I'm kind of disappointed that they didn't do that, because I'm afraid, given the current trend, we will probably see just a further progression in the trend where now, remember, in 1980, 40% of Japanese, Tokyo students were in private schools, high schools. Now it's 58, and in 2050 it would probably be 70%. And again, it's slightly unfair in terms of the demographics or on a regional basis, because in Hokkaido it's at the national average of 25%, whereas in Osaka it's 40-45%. So if you live in a remote area where you don't necessarily have the access to some of these better schools, then it really doesn't help you that much. So I'm really curious to see what the Chinese experiment will lead to in terms of results, and whether it will help rectify those two situations. I don't see how you can really reduce the workload, but if you can try to do as much of that as within the normal school curricula, that would seem to be a more desirable effect.
Well, I'm curious to see how the results will come out.
Exactly, and I think obviously, I don't know if I mentioned to you, but we had the Osaka public schools that have gone from 140 to 131 to now maybe 122 in a few years. And again, the reason is because 70 of those schools, more than half of them, are below their minimum level of students that they intake. And if you are below your minimum level for 3 years, then you face having the school closed. And obviously that problem that we have at the high school level is going to continue on into the university level. And I think the universities, I don't remember the total number of students that they have, but proportionally in the next 25 years, by 2050, if high school students go from 3 million to 2.2 million, we're going to see that phenomenon become greater and greater in the university area as well. So in that respect, I think that basically we're going to see more and more universities trying to figure out how are we going to deal with this situation, because they're already below their ideal threshold and they're also facing financial difficulty.
I wonder what's going to happen to public schools.
I don't know, and I hope that there's some kind of policy that addresses that in the near future. And again, I was talking about the irony in the school in terms of the Tutoring kyoiku. The irony is that it forced more people into cram schools. The irony of the tuition-free high schools, forcing more people into Juku and studying more, and not necessarily achieving the desired effect of helping the lower economic echelons get into the private schools. And the third irony, I would say, is with regard to the male-female, because as I mentioned earlier, in 85 and 99 we had the male-female equality laws, but in terms of these high schools, the private high schools and the top schools, only a fraction, one in the top 15 in Japan is co-ed, and 10 of the top 15, all of the top 15 in the U.S., whether they're private or public, are co-ed. Means that there's probably less opportunities for women to get into their desired universities, certainly in the areas of medicine or engineering or law or other areas like that. And the numbers bear it out, because again, in the areas of medicine and law, they're about 35% for medicine and 40% for law, whereas they're 55% in the U.S. And for engineering, they're about 15%, whereas there's over 30% in the U.S. So that's one issue. And I guess the final issue is basically when it comes to universities, and that is, do you know how much foreign students pay for the universities in Japan?
Full price, I assume?
If it's full price, the government basically subsidizes the public universities by about 1.8 million yen a year, and the private universities by about 150,000 yen a year. So if you wanted to go to Tokyo University, they recently raised the tuition, but it's still only about 650,000 yen a year. When I went to Waseda, it was about 800,000 yen a year, and now I think it's about 1.5 million yen a year. So if they go to a private university, they'll pay the same rate as a private student, which means that you're getting 150,000 yen subsidy from the national government. But if they go to a public university, they pay the same rate as the Japanese. And there's like 50,000 students that are in the public universities. Sorry, 50,000, a bit less maybe, sorry. You think about that, and again, coming from the US or Canada, if you go to UC, any UC, if you're from the state of California, you're paying like $15,000, right? You know how much you pay as an international student?
Maybe 50,000?
50 or 55,000, so over 3 times. As a Canadian, if you go to UBC, University of British Columbia, a local student from British Columbia is paying about 8,000, and if I'm out of country, I'm probably paying about 50,000. So you're paying about 7 times almost.
Wow.
So in the U.S. and Canada, students have been seen as a way to help buffer the financial coffers, kind of to help the finances for the government. But in Japan, they're a bit of a drain. And so the question is, do the Japanese continue to subsidize these things, hoping that this will be helping Japanese companies by giving them Japanese proficient and people experienced in Japanese studies for their future employers? Or do you say, well, we're not really getting our money's worth, and maybe we should charge them more? And the irony about the Japanese school system as well is you'll discover when you go to Japanese university, especially, I have to include also language schools and vocational schools, is that of the 400,000 foreign students that go to language schools, universities, and vocational schools, about 1/3 of them are from China. 1/4 of them are from Nepal, and about 10% are from Vietnam. So whether they're going for the education itself, or whether they're going so that they can have a job while they're here, because they're allowed to work 28 hours a week,
right,
is debatable. But I think the bigger issue is whether the Japanese government is getting its money's worth in terms of the subsidies that it's giving the foreign students. And we had this discussion at the high school level, they decided, it was a bit controversial, they decided that foreign students that came to Japanese high schools wouldn't get the same subsidies that the Japanese recommend, which I guess in a way is fair, because it's their own taxpayer money that's paying for it. Yeah. So ironically, even though we had this boom in the early 2000s in the educational stocks and the cram school stocks, we're finding that in the last couple of years, because of the tuition-free high school policy, we're seeing a second boom in education spending. But unfortunately, the boom in spending is more at above the median income line. So we'll have to see what happens to that trend, and we'll have to see whether the desired effect in the free tuition actually pays off. But in the Osaka experience, which we started in 2010 and increased in 2014, we have thus far been unable to see a significant increase in students from the local lower income levels or the public schools going to high schools such that it would give them a recognizable advantage over what their previous situation was.
Well, I hope the new subsidy doesn't discriminate against lower income people, because we would like to have a lot of well-educated citizens in our society, and if this new policy discriminates that, I'm not sure if this is good for our country.
Well, it's kind of ironic. It's ironic that the intended policy and the actual result might differ widely. So we'll have to see what happens there. And again, we'll also have to see what happens to the Japanese educational system, because we're finding a system which is becoming more and more reliant on the private schools, more and more reliant on the cram schools, with an effect that we're having a hollowing out in the public schools, and they're not really able to fulfill their original mandate. And that's a bit of a shame.
That is. This whole conversation reminded me of what Charlie Munger said about Asian students.
What did he say?
He said that the Americans can't beat the Asians in their economic development because their parents that send their children to cram school, the tiger mothers,
Yeah.
they force them to study. So that's
Yeah.
why Asia's developed so much more than the West. And
Well, that reminds me of my junior college professor who happened to be Cambodian.
oh yeah,
And he said that you guys, none of you will ever succeed the way Asia will succeed because none of you know what real hardship is.
huh.
So, and that was 40 years ago, and judging by what has happened to Asia in the interim, he might have been right.
Maybe.
Yeah,
We'll have to see then.
have to see.
Well, it was fascinating talking to you.
Great.
Thank you.
Love to talk to you, Ricky. Thank you.
Thank you.